Cold War is known as one of the most stressful times for America. Although a true war between the Soviets and Americans was never fought, it consisted of many proxy wars, espionage, and because of President Eisenhower's strategy, the emergence of the idea of mutually assured destruction. The war pitted South Korea and the United States, fighting under the auspices of the United Nations against North Korea and China. Other nations contributed troops as well, but since the South Korean army had virtually collapsed, American forces did most of the fighting. Korea being the first big proxy war of the Cold War made many people paranoid that it would cause the already unstable relations between the US and USSR to become even more unstable, thus leading to nuclear war. This was not simply a border dispute between two unstable dictatorships on the other side of the globe. Instead, many feared it was the first step in a communist campaign to take over the world. The risk of a domino effect taking place within Asia was too high for the US to ignore. And even disregarding the amount of casualties the war would cause from fighting, no one could predict the effect the weather would have on the US armed forces. Cold weather accounted for 16% of Army non-battle injuries, and over 5,000 US casualties of cold injury required evacuation from Korea during the winter of 1950 to 1951. Regardless of the potential danger that nuclear war posed, the US mobilized and prepared for war on June 5, 1950. And so began the Forgotten War. The plan was simple. Led by General MacArthur, the military would proceed with an amphibious invasion of Pusan and then of Incheon, so as to push back the North Korean forces to the Chinese border. Before the battle, General MacArthur had promised to Truman that he would not get the Chinese involved. The plan worked, and so all looked hopeful for the American and South Korean troops. And then, to everyone's surprise, the Chinese got involved. About 2 million Americans served in the Korean War, whether in the field or behind the lines. Within the US military, there was a unit called MASH. MASH stood for Medical Army Surgical Hospital, and it was the backbone of the US military. It was there to help any of those in need of assistance. They were quick and effective at what they did, making them essential to America's military. MASH would utilize helicopters to airlift people out of war zones so as to get them to a position where they could be properly attended to. They were able to move around with the military as well, to maximize the amount of people they could save. They had a success rate of more than 97% and could get people back in working condition in a very short amount of time. It's not surprising then that the only thing people remember from the Korean War was the show MASH, based off of real events and operations that took place within the MASH unit. Even still, many do not even know that it pertains to the Korean War, and think it takes place during the Vietnam War. Going back to the war, the Chinese offensive overwhelmed the American troops, thus pushing them back. The troops were pushed back past the 38th parallel and past Seoul, which was the capital of South Korea. The American troops were able to create a counter-offensive after this, pushing the North Korean and Chinese armies back to Panmunjom. At that point, an armistice was called, creating the DMZ line, which separates North and South Korea and still exists to this day. As with other wars, there were casualties. The United States lost 35,000 troops to the war, compared to North Korea and China, who lost somewhere between 400,000 and 530,000. The information regarding exactly how many is not something the US has been given access to because of our unstable relationship with North Korea at this time. As of today, the United States Congress has not formally declared war since World War II. All of our wars in the Middle East have been authorized using other means, which rather goes to show the heart of the nature of those different conflicts. The Korean War set a precedent for how the United States will go on to fight wars in the future. Attracting attention to these wars and making sure the public is aware of them is something that the government wants to avoid. Looking at the wars fought in the Middle East, we can see that this is pretty evident. In short, the Korean War was not the biggest of wars, nor the most glamorous of wars. It wasn't World War III, and it wasn't really controversial. Instead, it goes down in history as the Forgotten War. But its effect on the US government is still prevalent to this day.